kids, welcome to Building on the Rock. Today, you may notice we seem to have a bit of an abstract structure here. But it'll make sense in a moment. So, as you know, last week, we talked about kings and leaders, both big and small, and how they can keep you away from following God, because God is supposed to be your leader. But that being said, if the king is following God, and you're following the king and God, things shouldn't be a problem. However, Saul was not quite a perfect leader. He made a sacrifice without Samuel being there, and so he disrespected God by not following God's orders to wait for Samuel to come to do the sacrifice. And so, when he went to attack the Philistines, he found himself in a rather garish predicament, as Samuel told him that God was already against him 13 years into his reign because he disrespected God. And things like that just seem to collapse rather easily. We begin in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel, verses 16 to 22, also known as the end of the chapter. Saul and his son Jonathan were staying in Gibeah in the land of Benjamin. What was left of the army was there with them. At the same time, the Philistines camped at Michmash. 3 groups of soldiers went out from the Philistine camp to attack Israel. One group turned and went towards Ophrah in the land of Shaul. Another went towards Beth-horon. The third went towards the border that looked out over the valley of Zebam. That valley faces the desert. There weren't any blacksmiths in the whole land of Israel. That's because the Philistines had said the Hebrews might hire them to make swords or spears. So all the people of Israel had to go down to the Philistines. They had to go to them to get their plows, hoes, axes, and sickles sharpened. It cost 1/4 of an ounce of silver to sharpen a plow or a hoe. It cost 1/8 of an ounce to sharpen a pitchfork or an axe. That's also what it cost to put new tips on large sticks that were used to drive oxen. So not one of Saul or Jonathan's soldiers had a sword or spear in hand when he went out to battle. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had those weapons. Now you can see where these little abstract little pieces came from. This would be a sharpened sickle, for cutting grain. This kind of looks like an axe, double-headed one, sharpened lumber. And this is the best approximation I can make of a pitchfork with the pieces I have currently. But kind of looks pitchforky, stab the hay. So, in other words, the soldiers were literally given farming equipment to fight an army. That would be like in the Revolutionary War, fighting with a slingshot. It's just not effective. Not nearly to the degree of the enemy, that is. Now this was the first sign that Saul had made a terrible mistake, aside from Samuel telling him, because God had motioned all of Israel against Saul, through his divine will and using the Philistines to make a point that they were completely under-equipped to fight their enemy without God. Literally using farm equipment for a warrior's job. But Saul did not listen. And when he did not listen, things got dire. And because of that, we ought to learn a thing or two from Saul. Saul was not only an arrogant man to not listen to God when he told him to wait, which we often have a struggle with, waiting, but he also was arrogant after seeing that God had turned against him, clear as day, that he still marched headstrong in the battle. This is the kind of arrogance we're supposed to avoid, and the kind of arrogance we often see in our leadership. To think that, yeah, bad things are happening, God's clearly against me, but I can make it work. I'm good enough. Now, God has worked in poor circumstances before. In fact, David, coming up, as you probably know, took down a Goliath with a slingshot. But that does not underestimate the fact that Saul did not have God on his side. If Saul did, things would have been fine. but he was told explicitly that God had turned against him. And rather than repenting, or trying to make things right, or even just turning away and leaving his throne, knowing that another would take it, as Samuel had said, he kept moving forward. And it costs quite a lot. So, if you can learn anything from Saul, it is that arrogance is a deadly killer, especially in leadership. Because when we think we can do it without God, we may not have the right equipment on hand. Well, I hope you enjoyed this Bible lesson, and stick around so you can build these cool pieces of farming equipment, and maybe start a Lego farm. That could be cool. Today, we're going to be building a bunch of sharpened tools that are now being used for war. It doesn't go so well, but you can keep them as tools. To start, we're going to grab a 2x6 dark gray piece and attach to that a 1x2 light gray and 1x2 light gray with studs on the side. With the light gray 1x2 with studs on the side on top of the just regular one. Then, to finish off your sight, you're going to grab 2x2s in light gray. Attach one on top, curving it inward, and one on the studs on the side, curving it back. So you see it's got like a bit of a curve, and you can cut the wheat. Now that we have that done, we're going to get to work on the pitchfork, which is the simplest build, but it looks good, and it's kind of effective. So, we're going to grab another 2x6 dark gray, a 1x4, forgive me, in a dark gray on both sides, as you can see, not lined up, so that we can attach these 1x2s in dark gray to make it look complete. So that you can, grab your hay bales or fingers and just lift them up. That's what those are for, after all. Once you finish that, we're going to get to work on the axe, which just requires 4 little 2x2s in brown, of course, and another light gray 1x2 with studs on the side, a dark red 1x2 right on top of it, and 2 pieces of sloped upward 2x3s attached together to keep it from just falling apart so easily, with a 2x4 dark dirt brown plate. And there you go. You got yourself an axe, a scythe to cut the wheat, and a pitchfork to pull the wheat. I hope you enjoy these little farming tools, and feel free to improve them or unsharpen them to your needs. I hope you enjoyed this lesson today, and I'll see you again next week.